peacefully nestled in the heart of Amish country in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, on a bright and warm early fall day in 2006, Terry Roberts was having lunch outside with one of her coworkers. Their pleasant conversation and the quiet serenity of the surrounding Amish farmland was suddenly pierced by the wail of emergency sirens. As she often did when she heard sirens, Terry said a quick prayer for those involved in whatever was happening. Minutes later, a helicopter swooped overhead and began to circle nearby. After lunch, Terry walked back to her office and heard her phone ringing. It was her husband. "I need you to come to Charlie's house right away," he said. Charlie was their 32-year-old son, who was married with 3 children of his own. She didn't need to ask any questions. Her mother's instinct told her instantly that something was very, very wrong. Terry jumped into her car, and as she was frantically driving the 10-minute trip to her son's house, the news on the radio told her what had happened. At the local Amish schoolhouse, an armed man had entered the classroom, barricaded the doors and windows. He bound and shot 10 young Amish schoolgirls, killing at least half of them. Terry was panicking. She knew her son Charlie worked in that area and often parked his milk truck at the school. She wondered if Charlie had tried to rescue the children and been shot, or perhaps he himself had been taken hostage while trying to intervene and prevent the tragedy. All she could do was pray that Charlie was okay. When she arrived at her son's house, she had to get through a number of police and a large crowd of reporters. She pulled into the driveway where her husband and a state trooper were waiting for her. She was asking her question before she fully got out of the car. "Is Charlie alive?" The state trooper standing there simply and somberly answered her, "No, ma'am." Terry looked at her husband in shock, who then uttered words which completely shattered her already pierced heart. "It was Charlie," he said to her in disbelief. "He killed those girls." A few hours later, alone in their own home, Terry and her husband sat at their breakfast table in the kitchen in anguish. Terry thought of how her son was not only alive, but he had perpetrated the worst crime anyone could ever imagine. Her husband had been crying so hard and had wiped the tears from his eyes so often that a bleeding sore had opened up on his forehead. He wondered out loud how he could ever face his Amish neighbors again, whose children his son had just murdered. That's when Terry spotted one of their Amish neighbors, Henry Stoltzfus, walking up the driveway to her front door. He was dressed in his formal visiting attire, complete with a long black coat and wide-brimmed hat. Terry opened the door for him and invited him inside, but she couldn't say anything. She didn't know what to expect Henry to say, nor did she know how could she even respond to him. You see, Henry was part of the tight-knit Amish community that surrounded them, and he had friends and relatives who had lost their children that very morning. And yet, Henry was the one who spoke the first words. He stretched out his hand and gently placed it on Terry's husband's shoulder, and he said, "Roberts, we love you. We don't hold anything against you or your son. We're a forgiving people." Henry Stoltzfus stayed with him that afternoon for over an hour, consoling both Terry and her husband. At one point during the visit, her husband was finally able to choke out some words. "Thank you, Henry," was about all he could muster. Terry Roberts later recalled, "I just looked at that and said, 'Oh Lord, my husband will heal through this.' I was just so thankful for Henry that day." Oftentimes, my friends, the most powerful healing is effected through simple yet profound gestures like Henry's. A gently placed hand on someone's shoulder, or perhaps a loving embrace. Powerful healing can be effected through just a simple word or phrase like "I love you," or "I forgive you." Even a simple yes or no can change someone's entire outlook or relieve them of their pain, of guilt or regret. These actions have so much power to transform lives because they are the actions of Jesus Christ himself, who does them through us, his imperfect instruments. One example among countless others is in today's passage from Mark's gospel account. Jesus simply takes Simon Peter, Peter's mother-in-law's hand, into his, and immediately she's healed of what could very well be a life-threatening illness. It's the first physical healing that Mark recounts, coming right after last week's passage where we heard of Jesus' first spiritual healing, where he simply says, "Quiet, come out of him," to a demon-possessed man. And after convulsing, he cries out, but is freed and is made spiritually whole again. Mark continually shows us how profoundly Jesus heals, both spiritually and physically, with mere simple words or mere simple actions. My sisters and my brothers, I pray that each one of us has at some point experienced this profound healing power of Jesus Christ and understand how it comes often in small gestures and words, perhaps just in the quiet prayer of our heart, or in the few words of a priest in the sacrament of reconciliation, or in the embrace of a family member, friend, or even a stranger. Simple words or gestures that can transform us to our very core. We're called to have open hearts to Christ in order that we may not only receive him during these healings, but in turn be an instrument of Christ to deliver them to others around us. Like Henry Stoltzfus, through God's superabundant and free gift of grace, we have the ability to perform profound acts of mercy and charity that bear the real healing power of Jesus Christ. Following the perfect example in today's gospel account, when the disciples immediately tell Christ about Peter's sick mother-in-law, we immediately tell our troubles to Christ when they arise and place them in his hands. And when Peter's mother-in-law is healed, she models the true life of Christian discipleship. You see, after being touched and healed by Christ, she in turn then begins to serve others. Incredible encounters with Christ like these bring us to a deeper conversion, where we more willingly and radically shape our lives to conform to God's perfect will. And we more willingly and openly receive and give God's love back to him and to one another. Opportunities to receive Christ's transformative healing power and to be an instrument of it come to us frequently through a strong and ongoing relationship with Jesus. We must open our hearts to his grace. We must get to know Christ through prayer, through the study of sacred scripture, and reception of the Eucharist. Avail ourselves to the sacrament of reconciliation and make the most of opportunities to be of service to others. Let us, my friends, go forth from here today with the willingness and the desire to receive Christ and to be Christ to others through profound and simple healing encounters. Then, my friends, I pray that each of us will be able to raise our eyes heavenward and authentically declare with our own lips, hearts, and minds, and deeds, the words of Psalm 30. I cried to you, Lord, and you healed me. I will praise you forever. May Jesus Christ be praised.